Hi everyone, welcome back to the next session of our course on data structures and algorithms. Today we will be discussing what are data types. So we know that there is a lot of data today, as we know that the data is the new oil. And we have already seen that to store this data we have data structures with us. Data structures basically store data efficiently so that it can be processed easily and used further efficiently. So now we have structures to store data, we have certain format to store data, but how do we actually distinguish what data is of what type and how should we structure that further? So to distinguish this we have data types. Say I give you A and 5. As human beings, we are easily able to distinguish that A is an alphabet and 5 is a number. So for us, the term number and alphabet are two different data types. So the characters A to Z belong to the category alphabet and all the numbers belong to the category number. But how do we tell the computer? So to tell the computer this, we have what is called as data type. So let us discuss this further in detail. In computer science and computer programming, a data type or simply type is an attribute of data that tells the compiler or interpreter how the programmer intends to use this data. So a data type is also known as simply type. Alright. It is an attribute of data. Now, what do you mean by attribute? Characteristic of data that tells the compiler or interpreter. Why do we need it? So that we as human beings can inform the compiler or interpreter, which will further inform the machine or our computer as to what type of a data it is. So that tells the compiler or interpreter how the programmer intends to use the data. So whether it is a number or it is a decimal point, say float number, or it is a character and etc. We need to tell the compiler or interpreter how we want to use the data, and so we use data types, right? So all variables use data type during their declaration, right? So whenever a variable is defined in C++, variable is defined in C++, say that we have an integer based variable or a character or a floating point number, right? Whenever any variable is declared of any type, some memory is allocated to it, right? And this memory allocation is also dependent upon the type of data it is. So an integer will occupy certain bytes of memory, but character will not necessarily occupy the same amount of memory, and float will again occupy different value in the memory. So our memory allocation of all these variables that are declared within a program depends upon the data type it is. So I hope what are data types is clear. Now moving on to the types of data types, right? On the first level, they can be distinguished as built-in data types, derived data types, and user-defined data types, right? Built-in data types are also known as primitive data types. What are these? That they are built-in or predefined data types and can be used directly by the user to declare variables, right? Used directly by user, and these are predefined. Examples are int, char, float, double, void. Also another one is bool here, which is not mentioned. All of these will be discussed in the next slides. Now derived data types. These are derived from the primitive, right? So hence the name derived from built-in data types. I'm using DT as a short for data type. Alright. So these can be of 4 types, which are array, function, pointer, and reference. We will further discuss all of these as well. Thirdly, are user-defined data types. These are also known as abstract data types. Abstract data types. These are defined by the user, hence the name user-defined, right? And examples include structure, union, class, enumeration, etc. Defined by user as per the requirement of the user. So let us discuss certain fundamental or built-in data types, also called as primitive data types, as we've already discussed, right? So primitive data types are integer, character, boolean or bool, double, and float, right? So let us first discuss integer data type. Integer is a keyword. Is a keyword for integer data type, right? It typically requires 4 bits of memory. 1, 2, 4 bytes of memory. I'm sorry. And its ranges are further discussed in the last slide. So you can refer to all of those ranges from there. Now character is a data type used for storing characters. The keyword is known as char, right? It has only 1 byte of memory space, right? These are in terms of bytes, right? Now boolean is another data type which has 2 values possible, true or false. It is used for storing logical values, right? Whose output can be only true or false. And it also occupies a space of 1 byte in the memory space. Now double, it is a double precision floating point number. Before that, let us discuss what a floating point number is. A floating point data type is used for storing single precision floating point values or decimal values, right? And it requires 4 bytes of memory in the memory space. So here I'll put float and 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now double floating point, it is used for storing double precision floating point number, and therefore it shall require 8 bytes of memory in the memory space, right? There was also another type mentioned in the flow chart that we saw, which was void here, right? So void means without a value. So void data type represents an entity which has no value. It is used for a function that does not return any value. Like we've already experienced in C++ is void main. So such a function will not return any value. Hence the data type is void for this particular function, right? So Now, derived data types, as we've already discussed, these are formed from the fundamental data types and are hence known as derived data types. So we have function, array, pointers, and reference. All of these will be discussed in the further lectures as well. So we need not spend a lot of time here, but the only fact that we need to take care of is that these are derived data types and not primitive. They are derived from the fundamental data types and known as derived data types. Moving on to user-defined data types. They are defined by the user, meaning that say for example, let us take an example of a class. A class is just a collection of variables and methods, and it is used for any particular, say like we have a class humans, right? And we have characteristics stored in it with functions and all. So these are defined by the user themselves and as per requirement of the user. All of these will also be discussed in the further lectures. So without spending any more time on this, we shall move forward to data type modifiers. Now we have already discussed that we have certain different types of data types and we can store different types of data into these data types. But what if we have a particular data type and we just want to store a larger value to it? So can we modify the size? For the standard integer data type has 4 bytes, right? And occupies 4 bytes in the memory space. Now that we want to store a larger number than int, can we modify the size of int? So the following that you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, are data type modifiers, and they are used with the built-in data types to modify the length of the data that they hold, right? So what are they? They are used with primitive data type to modify the length of data they hold, right? So now we see signed, unsigned, long and short. Signed is used with integer, character. Unsigned is used with integer, character. Long is used with integer, double. And short is used with integer, right? So these are the 4 data types. And how do they modify the length? Let us check it out in the next table. So short is the name of short int. In terms of bytes, it occupies 2 bytes and the range lasts from minus 32,768 to 32,767. Now unsigned short is an integer number without minus sign. It holds 2 bits. Signed short is an integer number with minus sign. It holds 4 bits. Now int is an integer may or may not be signed, so that holds 2 bits. Unsigned int 2 bytes. Signed int 2 bytes. Both short and int are similar, so long 4 bytes. Unsigned long 4 bytes. Signed long 4 bytes, right? So I hope the table is clear to you, and we have discussed data types as well as data type modifiers. The further in detail explanations for derived and user defined data types will be discussed in the further video lectures. So until then, stay safe and continue learning. Thank you.